Hello everyone, welcome to another tutorial for Hammer. At Hammer, our goal is to build an extremely adaptive flight automation platform for the commercial drone industry. In this particular tutorial, we're going to look at how you can use Hammer to create vertical inspection missions to survey facades, cliffs, waterfalls, any form of a vertical structure that follows a rigid profile. So let's jump right in. So what you can see is that I've already got the map centered here on a number of different buildings. This is actually a brewery that's been abandoned and potentially due for some inspection. So let's have a look at how we can create a facade inspection. So the first thing you need to do is you need to press the top right button over here, which will open the missions menu. So this is going to give you all the different types of missions that are available in Hammer. There are about 13 different missions that you can choose from, but at the moment we're going to focus on this guy here, the vertical inspection mission. So we tap on the vertical inspection mission, at which point Hammer's going to ask you to draw the lines on the structure edges and then to tap OK. So the edge of the structure we want to survey is essentially this edge. Well, it could actually be more than one edge, so it could be this edge or that edge. So for the purpose of this demo, let's just start with this edge, and we can sort of like gradually build on to more than one edge at a time. So what you would now do is essentially tap on the corner of the edge, and you will see Hammer will put a point on the screen, and then you tap on the other edge of the facade, and once you're done, tap OK over there. And Hammer will generate a default flight plan based on that. Now obviously this is a default flight plan, the parameters have not been tuned, and this is what we're going to do next. So as with other missions in Hammer, we would go into the missions gear and tap that button to open the mission settings. So once I tap that, that will bring up different mission settings. So let's go into let's go into the settings one by one. So we've got the mission type, which is vertical inspection, and that's not going to change. Then we've got the camera type. So obviously this depends on what camera you'd want to fly with. At the moment we've got Mavic 2 Pro sets, but we can tap on that box and configure any camera we like. Hammer currently supports almost all DJI cameras, and also Sony and MikaSense cameras. So let's say for the purpose of this video that we're going to do this with a Phantom 4 Pro. So once we've selected that, tap done. And the next setting we've got to configure is the top altitude. So this is essentially the altitude of the aircraft relative to the ground. So we've got to remember that for DJI aircrafts, all the altitudes are always relative to the ground and not to the sea level or to the ground level. So we've got to make sure this is relative to the takeoff point on the ground. So let's sort of set that to 40 meters for the moment. Obviously this is hard to predict what the actual height of the facade is, but what we will do is that we will actually go to the site and make this more accurate. I'll get to that in a moment. But once we've configured the top altitude, we carry on to the bottom altitude. So we do the same process. Let's say the bottom altitude is actually at 5 meters from the takeoff point. So we configure that, and we will notice that the altitudes on the left hand side of the screen of the mission itself have changed from 40 meters to 5 meters. So that's indicating what are the altitudes involved in the mission. So now once you've configured the altitudes, you might notice there are these drone icons over here, and essentially these drone icons allow you to retrieve the altitude of the drone in flight. And the main idea here is that since this is pre-flight planning, this is planning inside, indoors before we actually go to the site, we can only guess these altitudes. We can't really be sure what the height of the building is or the height of the facade is that we want to survey. So what we do on the site is actually we will take the drone and manually fly it to the top edge, or the top, well, essentially align it with the top altitude of the facade. So once we've done that, we will tap this button here. So if I tap it now, it's going to say cannot fetch drone's current altitude, not connected. So that's because we're not connected to a drone at the moment. But if you go to the site and you fly the drone to the top of the facade and tap that button, that's going to fetch the altitude of the drone, and it's going to set that altitude as the top altitude of the mission. So that's very useful because you're essentially using the drone as a measurement instrument to get a very precise idea of where the facade starts. And then we repeat the same thing with the bottom altitude. So we would then take the drone and we would fly it to the lowermost point of the facade, and we would tap the drone icon here. And once we tap that, it's going to retrieve the altitude of the drone and set it as the mission height. So this allows us to be really accurate in terms of what is the height of the facade, what's the top altitude, and what's the bottom altitude. And effectively it gives Hammer a box to calculate the mission in. So once we've done that, we carry on configuring the other settings. So we've got the gimbal pitch, so that's essentially the tilt of the gimbal. Obviously, we want to set that to 0 or very close to 0, which is essentially perfectly horizontal without any tilt at all. And that's because we're doing a facade inspection, so we want to be looking forward as we do the inspection. However, if you want to give it a slight tilt to have a more of an oblique angle to your inspection, then you can go ahead and do that. For this particular demo, we're going to keep it at 0 pitch. The next setting is the horizontal distance. So this is the distance to maintain from the building or the structure. So as you can see, there are these blue points that have been generated in these missions. So the blue points are essentially the top-down line on which the drone is going to move. So the drone is going to maintain itself in this particular, on these blue points, and it's going to go up and down on these blue points. So as you can notice right now, they're quite close to the other building, and we would actually want to be a lot closer to the facade. So let's go ahead and change that number to 5 meters. And once we change that to 5 meters, we see that the blue points are now much closer to the facade. And in fact, you can also notice that there are many more blue points than there were before. And that's because we would want the same overlap at that distance. So it's similar to the conventional mapping missions that you might be familiar with, but instead of being a top-down view for mapping, it's more of a top-down view in a different plane almost. So it's a top-down view in the XZ plane as opposed to the XY plane. So once we've configured that, we can then go ahead and configure the image overlap. So right now it's set to 20%, but if I increase that, you will see the number of images increase. So the number of blue points on which the drone is going to fly are going to increase. If I reduce that, you will see that the blue points decrease. So let's keep that at 30% for this flight. And we've got the flight plan generated. And yeah, so the next setting we've got is the start point number. So this is essentially telling Hammer which point in the mission to start from. So if we drag this slider, we would notice that the green arrow here changes. So the idea here is that you can start from any point in the mission. So you don't necessarily have to start from the first point and then the last point. This is particularly useful after battery replacement if there's a particular point you want to start from, as opposed to carrying on from the last captured points. So this is really giving you that extra flexibility to maneuver the point you want to start at. But let's say we want to start at the first point and we want to keep it simple right now. And the last setting is to rotate points. So this is quite important. So actually, at the moment, you notice that Hammer generated the flight on this side of the line. So if this is if you notice the blue line, that was the line we drew to indicate the facade. And Hammer generated a flight plan on this side of the facade, not that side. But it is possible that you drew the line the other way around, so you drew it from right to left as opposed to left to right. And in that case, Hammer would actually generate a flight plan on the other side. So we would want to have a way to rotate the flight plan so that's almost by 180 degrees, so that it's actually facing the right side of the facade. So if I hit the rotate points, you'll notice the points are now on the other side of the facade. And obviously we don't want to fly that, but the setting is in there just in case the original flight plan that was generated was not quite in the direction you'd want it to be. So let me give you an example. Let's say if I go in and create another vertical inspection. So I choose vertical inspection and I draw a facade over here. Let's say that point there. So well, it's been generated in the right side. Let me just delete that quickly. So if I delete that and let me generate the facade from down to up. And yeah, so once we've generated that facade, you can notice the blue points have been generated on the wrong side. So we want to rotate that, and so we go into settings and we rotate points, and we notice that the points are now facing the right side of the facade. So it just gives you again that flexibility in case the default points aren't generated on the right side, to be able to say, well, actually the facade is on the other side, so just rotate that for me, please, and Hammer will do that. So let me just get rid of that mission that I just drew. So by the way, you can get rid of any mission by tapping on the magic wand and then clicking on the bin, and once you've got the bin clicked, you'll have these red X's on the screen, which delete the entire missions they're associated with. So the X over here is associated to that mission, and that X is associated to this mission. So if you want to get rid of that mission, you tap on that X. So there we go. And once you're done deleting, we can just tap on the bin again, and that will get rid of the delete mode. So that's basically how you configure vertical inspection missions. So we've got the base mission configured. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to simulate that to make sure that everything is how we configured it to be. So let's go ahead and start the simulators. To start the simulator, we got to make sure that that your tablet or iPad is not connected to a drone. And once it's not connected to the drone, just hit the play button. If you hit the play button, Hammer's going to ask us if there's no drone connected. Would you like to start a simulator? Tap OK, and then choose a home location as indicated at the top over here. So we choose a home location, we tap OK, and we will notice that a simulated drone will appear on the screen, and it will start conducting the vertical inspection. So at the moment you notice it's moving from right to left, but very shortly you'll notice that once it gets to this point here, it's going to drop in altitude. It's at 40 meters right now. It's going to drop to potentially, well, I'm not 100% sure what the altitude will be, but based on the overlap, it will drop to altitude below 40 meters, and it would carry on all the way to the right, and then back all the way to the left. So you can see the altitude has now dropped to 36 meters. Roughly, and it's going to now move all the way to the right. We can also increase the simulation speed by tapping on these arrows here, so that you can go through the simulation much faster, and you will see that the drone is constantly going left to right, and as it's going left and right, it's also losing altitude so that it can go all the way down to 5 meters from takeoff point as we configured. And once it's done that, it's and obviously it's capturing pictures all this way. It's going to be stopping at every blue point, taking a picture, and then moving on. So it's going to be stopping and capturing because it's an inspection mission. We do have some mapping missions which would allow you to capture continuously. So we will notice, and I'm going to slow this down as it gets to the last lines. It's at 5.5 meters. I'm just going to speed it up just enough so that it finishes the mission. And once it's finished the mission, it's going to fly back home. So that's how you simulate the mission. Okay, so we've got the mission set up, we've configured it, we've simulated it, and now what we need to set up before we go to the field are the overall flight settings. So the overall flight settings can be configured over here, and this is quite important because these are useful for configuring not just the flight settings, but also the safety settings. For instance, the go home height, the go home safety, battery level at which the drone should come home. So we tap on this wrench icon on the bottom right of the screen, which will open a menu. And once we've gone into that menu, we can now configure all the flight settings. So the first setting is to do with the map. So we're not going to change the map. We've already got the mission configured, so we move on. The next setting is to do with the drone. So the drone is a simulated drone at the moment. This is purely an indicator for what drone you've got connected. If you've got a Phantom 4 Pro connected or a Mavic connected, it will just indicate that here. The next setting is the maximum drone speed. So this is important. So if you'd want your drone to fly at a certain speed, and this might be because of the wind conditions, or you might have a camera attached that you don't want to exceed a certain speed, you can then configure that over here. So this is the maximum drone speed. You will notice that in mapping missions, Hammer will slow the speed down to take into account the camera shutter interval, the exposure speed, and a number of these variables to make sure that the pictures are not being compromised in any way because of the trigger interval and all these sort of other settings that the cameras have. So we can freely set that to let's say we want to do that at 12 meters per second. So that's how you set up the drone speed. And following that, we've got the safety settings. So the first setting is the go home heights. So obviously you'd want the setting to be a height that is taller than the mission. So at the moment the mission is at 40 meters, the go home height is at 187 meters, which is quite high to be fair. In most countries you wouldn't fly more than 120 meters, but even then for a facade inspection, we wouldn't expect you to go more than 10 meters above the mission itself. So if the mission's at 40 meters highest point, the go home height should be ideally 10 meters above the mission for safety reasons, and that height should not have any obstacles. So we're going to drag this all the way down to 50 meters. One of the things you'll notice is when once we hit 50 or low, is that Hammer will give you a warning. It will tell you that one or more missions are higher or within 10 meters of the current go home heights. So Hammer expects you to have more than 10 meters of difference between the mission and the go home heights. This is obviously not super necessary, but it's just a warning that Hammer will give you so that you make sure your go home height is actually higher than the mission. For the purpose of this demo, let's keep it at 55, and the warning goes away, and we're all good. So the next setting is the go home battery level. So obviously during the mission, if it's a facade inspection, it is highly likely that you're going to run out of battery, and if you run out of battery, obviously the drone is going to go into the go home sequence, which is the standard for DJI, which means the drone is going to climb to the go home height, and then it's going to fly in a straight line to the home point and land. So it really depends what battery level you'd want that to happen at. The recommended level is typically 30%, but since it's a facade inspection, you could be fairly close to the drone and you can keep it at 20%, since the drone doesn't have to fly a long distance to be able to get home. But for some of the mapping missions or tower mapping or something that is at a larger height, we would make sure that it's actually 30% so that you have enough battery to be able to go home. The next settings are maximum altitude and radius. So this is essentially just the maximum envelope in which the drone is allowed to fly. Now, obviously based on the country of your operation, you might want to keep this as low as 120 meters or 100 meters, and you might want to keep the maximum radius all the way down to 400 meters. These are just plainly for safety reasons, and these are maximum altitude and radius in case you configure something wrong. The drone will still will not take off and go beyond those limits. We can keep these to something sensible based on our country of operation and also based on our flying permissions. So let's say 120 meters and 500 meters. And carrying on, we've got the connection loss action. So this is to do with the expected action when the controller signal or the connection between the remote control and the drone is lost. So this is possible if you've got buildings in between the controller and the drone, or any form of a structure that can interfere with the signal. The recommended action is to continue the mission so that the drone, having knowledge of what it needs to do in the mission, having all the points calculated and knowing where it needs to orient and everything, it can carry on doing the mission until you recover the signal. But if you prefer, for safety reasons, you can always ask the drone to hover until you recover the signal, or you can ask the drone to start a go home sequence. So as explained before, in this particular mode, the drone is going to climb to the go home altitude and it's going to fly to the home point in a straight line. Then you've got some other settings. So you've got go home after missions. So this is if you want to automatically trigger a go home sequence after you've finished the mission. Bear in mind that this would only be triggered if the drone is more than 20 meters away from the home location. As this is a vertical inspection and we are fairly likely to be quite close to the building, we would actually recommend keeping this off and bringing the drone home manually once the inspection is complete. Simply because if you're within 20 meters off the home point, if the drone is within 20 meters of the home point, it's going to start landing, and you don't want your drone to be landing right after the mission in front of a building. So we would want to keep that off for this particular mission, but for mapping missions or something where you're further out, I think it's absolutely a good idea to keep that on. And then you've got some of the other settings, for example, obstacle avoidance. So if the drone has proximity sensors, for example, a Mavic 2 Pro, for instance, has a lot of proximity sensors all over 360. So you'd want to keep that on so that those sensors are used, especially in facade inspection. The drone will be able to sense the facade if it gets too close to it, because maybe the wind pushes it that way or anything like that. So it's quite important to keep that on. And the last setting is imperial units. So if you prefer having the altitude in feet as opposed to meters, then you can keep that setting on. And once you do that, you will notice that the altitude for the mission is in 131 is in feet. And even if you scroll here you will see all the altitudes change to feet. Go home height is also in feet, so all the altitudes will change to feet. And I think that makes it quite convenient, because then you can differentiate between altitude as being in feet and the distance as being in meters. And that's basically it. And then you've got a couple of other settings. So you've got these settings aren't necessarily to do with safety, but they're to do with what happens before and after the flight. So if you want to create this mission from let's say a KML file, if you've already got the GPS points of the building that are quite accurate and you'd want to use them instead, then you can use that KML file. The only thing to bear in mind for a KML file is that it needs to have a line string tag inside for Hammer to recognize it as a line. Because essentially the structure here is a line, and we want to make sure that the line is imported inside, not points, not polygons, just a line. So the KML should have that structure. You could import a mission file created by Hammer. We're going to cover that on a separate video, how you can share missions between different devices. And lastly, you've got the export flight logs. So once you've done with the flight, you can hit that button, and Hammer is going to export the entire history of all flight logs in a single folder, and you can easily send that to your computer using AirDrop, or you can email it to yourself, however you prefer. All right, so that's basically how you set up a vertical inspection mission in Hammer. Now, what we're going to do for the purpose of this video is we're going to show you that you can actually set up multiple vertical facade inspections or vertical inspections, and you can even link them in the same flights. So let's say we want to do this facade here, and we also want to do that facade there. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to choose vertical inspection as I demonstrated before. I'm going to generate the mission. I'm going to go into the mission gear. I'm going to change the horizontal distance so that it's very close to the building. Let's say 5 meters to the line. I'm going to adjust the line a little bit so that it's actually more straight. And I'm going to hit play, and I will notice that Hammer will now do both the facades in one flight, and I can increase the simulation speed, so that will allow me to sort of see what might be the end results. And you can link any number of missions in the same flight, which gives you a lot of power to be able to do different things. In fact, they don't have to be the same mission. You could go in and say, well, actually I want to do an inspection mission, a roof inspection, and combine that with a vertical inspection to do the facades, and that way you can cover the entire building. So there are a number of ways you can create your mission. Gives you that flexibility, but also the right ease of use, and I think together they form adaptability, which is what we're after. So one last feature I'd like to show you before I leave you is that you can now also mark this building as an obstacle. So for instance, we've seen that the line going from one mission to the other is a direct line, and maybe we want to block that path as a no-fly zone. And let's go into the mission menu one more time and select the obstacle. So if you select the obstacle, we can mark this, some of this building. If I go in and tap right there, if I tap right there, and I tap OK, I have created an obstacle. And now if I hit play and restart the mission, you will notice that Hammer actually doesn't go into the obstacle, it goes along it to avoid the obstacle in flight. And again, it gives you that amount of power in terms of deciding how the drone is going to avoid obstacles and how it's going to be able to do more than one mission in the same flight. So I hope this was useful. The one last thing that we would also recommend checking before you fly any of these missions is a Google Earth preview of the mission. So to have a look at that, you can go into the mission settings. So let's say we want to have a look at that particular mission, and we can go all the way to the top and we click on Google Earth and click on 3D view and click on copy. That's going to import facade inspection inside Google Earth, and I can then see it in Google Earth and sort of really sort of see it in 3D as to what the drone will do. This just gives you another contextual idea as to what to expect from the drone. But in a sense, you could even export the KML file and you could view it on your computer through Google Earth in a more desktop environment. And all these sort of pre-flight safety checks just help you make sure that there are less errors and have a more accurate flights. And that's really what our aim is at the moment, to help drone professionals collect as precise data as possible. So hope this video was useful. If you have any questions, please drop us a comment in the comment section. And also, if you have any questions, you can directly reach us out to us at team@hammermissions.com. We'd be more than happy to help you. Thank you.